I basically dropped everything for 6 months and paid almost 40 grand out of pocket to take care of my dad. I heard my own husband say that on the phone to an old college buddy, bragging it up smooth as anything, like it was his favorite story to tell, the one he pulled out whenever he wanted somebody to think well of him. I caught him in a lie right then and there, recorded plain as day on my own phone by pure accident. He denied it in front of everyone 3 weeks later at his father's recovery dinner, doubled down hard when I tried calling it out gentle. Then I played the recording. My name is Meredith Holt, I'm 31 years old, and I live outside Columbus, Ohio. Before I get into it, y'all drop your city or state down in the comments. I always love knowing who's out there listening tonight, wherever you're tuning in from. I married my husband Marcus when I was 26, 4 years into a relationship that started sweet and easy, the kind of thing that felt simple back then. In a way, marriage apparently isn't required to stay. We met at a mutual friend's barbecue, both of us reaching for the same pair of tongs at the grill, laughing about it for the rest of the night. Marcus worked in insurance sales, decent at it, charming in the exact way that makes a person good at sales, the kind of guy who could talk to absolutely anybody at a party and leave them feeling like the most interesting person in the room. I worked as a physical therapist at a rehab clinic just outside the city, a job I genuinely loved, helping people rebuild strength and mobility one careful session at a time. We built a nice ordinary life together, a small house with a garden. I never quite got the hang of, nothing flashy, just steady, the kind of life I figured most people were quietly hoping for underneath all the noise. 3 years into our marriage, Marcus's father, Gary, had a massive stroke, collapsed in his garage on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon while working on his old truck, left with serious mobility issues and a long, grueling road of rehabilitation ahead of him that nobody in that family was prepared for. And here's the part that matters for everything I'm about to tell you. Marcus, my own husband, could not handle it. Not the hospital visits, not the rehab appointments, not any of it. Something about seeing his own father that vulnerable just short-circuited something in him, and he pulled back hard, made excuses about work, about not being good in medical settings, about needing to process things his own way, while I, a physical therapist by trade, someone who genuinely understood exactly what Gary needed to recover, stepped in and did nearly all of it myself, without ever once being formally asked to. If you've ever watched somebody you loved freeze up when their family needed them most, and quietly picked up the slack yourself without complaint, telling yourself it was just what family does, even as the imbalance kept growing, I want to know. Tell me in the comments what that felt like for you and how long it took before you noticed the pattern for what it actually was. I cut my own hours at the clinic for 6 months to manage Gary's care, personally coordinating his outpatient therapy, driving him to appointments 3 times a week, working with him myself on exercises most evenings at his kitchen table long after my own official workday had ended. I paid nearly $38,000 out of my own savings money my grandmother had left me years earlier, that I'd always figured I'd use for something like a down payment someday, covering gaps in his insurance that would have otherwise left him without proper equipment and in-home support during the hardest stretch of his recovery. Marcus visited maybe once a week, always a little pale, always leaving early, always thanking me quiet in the car afterward for handling everything, which at the time felt like genuine gratitude, instead of what I'd later understand. It actually was a man quietly outsourcing his own guilt onto somebody willing to carry it for him. Gary recovered better than anybody expected, walking again within the year, largely because of consistent patient rehabilitation work, the exact kind of work I'd built my entire career around and poured into my own father-in-law nearly every single day for half a year straight, watching him regain a little more strength each week until the day he finally walked unassisted across his own living room, and both of us cried right there on the spot. Here's where things started shifting in a way I didn't clock right away. At the family's first big gathering after Gary's recovery, a backyard cookout that following summer with burgers on the grill and cousins running around the yard, Marcus stood up with a beer in his hand and told the whole extended family, aunts, uncles, cousins, all of it, about how he'd basically moved in for those 6 months, how he'd handled all the appointments, how proud he was that he'd stepped up when it mattered. Nobody corrected him. I sat there, fork halfway to my mouth, stunned quiet, watching my own husband take a full 6 months of my life, my savings, my career sacrifice, and rearrange it into a story about his own devotion in front of 30 people who genuinely believed every word of it. If you've ever had somebody quietly take credit for something that cost you everything to give, I want to know how you handled that first moment. And stick around because we're only just now getting to the part where it stopped being just one story at one cookout. I told myself that first time it was just Marcus being awkward, exaggerating a little the way people sometimes do, telling a story at a party, maybe genuinely believing his own more active role than it actually was, in the fog of a stressful year memory, playing tricks the way it sometimes does under stress. I let it go. But then it happened again at Thanksgiving that same year. Marcus telling the story again to a fresh round of relatives passing through the kitchen, a little more polished this time, mentioning specific dollar amounts. Now numbers that were actually mine, my $38,000 becoming, in his retelling, what I ended up putting into Dad's care. Said so casually, between passing the mashed potatoes that nobody even paused to question it. I brought it up to him privately after that dinner, gentle as I could manage, standing in our own kitchen doing dishes side by side, not wanting to make it into a bigger thing than it needed to be. Babe, you know it was mostly me who handled all that, right? The money, the appointments. He got defensive fast, set down the dish towel a little too hard, said I was being weird about it, that obviously we did it together as a family, that I was making something out of nothing, and should just let people be proud of him for once. I let it go again, though something in me had started keeping score by then, whether I meant to or not, a quiet ledger building in the back of my mind that I couldn't quite stop myself from adding to. Year 2. After Gary's recovery at his sister's wedding, the toast happened again. This time, even more removed from the truth. Marcus standing up in a rented tux with a champagne glass in hand, telling a table of Gary's old friends how he'd basically become his father's full-time caretaker for half a year. How it had changed him as a man, his voice cracking just enough at the right moment to sell the whole performance. His own mother sitting right there in her mother of the bride dress, dabbed her eyes with a cloth napkin, and told everyone within earshot how proud she was of her son, the one who really stepped up when his father needed him most. I sat 2 seats down in my own bridesmaid dress, smiling because that's what you do at a wedding, feeling something harden in my chest that I didn't fully understand the size of yet, watching an entire room toast a version of events that simply hadn't happened. If you've ever watched somebody's entirely fabricated version of events get celebrated by an entire room, while the truth sat silent right beside them, I want to know how that felt. And this next part is exactly why I finally started keeping real proof, instead of just quietly stewing about it in the car on the drive home. I started noticing the story evolve more each time he told it. Small embellishments piling on top of each other until it barely resembled anything close to what had actually happened in that house 3 years earlier. The appointments multiplying, the dollar figures creeping upward, his role growing a little more heroic with every fresh audience. I didn't say anything else out loud about it, not for a long while, tired of being called dramatic every time I tried. Instead, I just started paying closer attention the way you learn to, once you realize somebody's rewriting history right in front of you and getting away with it clean every single time, applause and all. The recording happened almost by accident. I was in the next room folding laundry on an ordinary Sunday afternoon, the kind of quiet weekend day that doesn't stand out from any other, when Marcus was on a call with his old college roommate Tyler, catching up after years of barely talking. The kind of easy reconnection call old friends fall back into like no time passed at all. My phone happened to be recording a voice memo for something unrelated, a grocery list I'd been dictating hands-free while folding towels, and I just let it keep running when I heard Marcus's voice shift into that same practiced storytelling tone I'd come to recognize instantly by then, the one he used specifically for this story, and I was starting to realize, maybe only this story. Yeah, man, it was rough, but I basically dropped everything for 6 months and paid almost 40 grand out of pocket to take care of my dad after his stroke. You do what you gotta do for family, you know? 40 grand. He'd inflated even the dollar amount, now rounding my actual 38,000 up into a rounder, better-sounding number, for a story he was telling for an audience of exactly one old friend who had no way of ever checking it. No wedding guests to perform for no mother dabbing her eyes nearby. This wasn't him getting swept up in a moment in front of a crowd anymore. This was just how he told the story now, privately unprompted to somebody who'd have zero reason to doubt him. Would y'all have confronted him right then? Or waited the way I did? I'd love to know down in the comments. And if you've ever caught somebody rewriting your own sacrifice into their personal highlight reel, hit that subscribe button, because what happened at his father's recovery anniversary dinner 3 weeks later is exactly the moment I'd been quietly building toward, without even fully admitting that to myself yet. I told my best friend Angela about the recording the same week I found it sitting on her back porch with 2 glasses of wine going warm in the evening heat, laying out 3 years of watching my own story get told wrong at every family gathering I couldn't skip. Angela had heard bits of it over the years enough to already have her suspicions, and she just listened a long while before saying the thing I needed somebody outside my own head to say plain. Meredith, you've been sitting on proof this whole time and just letting him keep doing it. What are you actually waiting for? I didn't have a good answer for her that night, not one I could say out loud without it sounding smaller than it actually was. I didn't say anything to Marcus about the recording. I just saved it, transferred it off my phone onto a cloud folder Angela helped me set up that same evening, and waited, not entirely sure yet what I was waiting for. Only that something in me had finally stopped being willing to let this slide one more time without consequence, and Angela's question kept turning over in my head every single day between then and that dinner. 3 weeks later, Gary's family threw a small dinner marking 3 years since his stroke. A tradition that had started as genuine gratitude and had slowly over time become mostly a stage for Marcus's increasingly elaborate telling of that same story. Everyone gathered around Gary's dining table with a cake that said, 3 years strong in blue frosting. Sure enough, partway through dinner, glass raised, Marcus launched into it again, the fullest version yet $40,000, now stated plain as established fact. 6 months sounding now like a year in his retelling details about appointments he'd genuinely never once attended, woven in seamless. His mother already reaching for a tissue in anticipation of the emotional finish. I set my own glass down and said calm as I could manage, despite my heart hammering in my chest. Marcus, that's not quite how it happened, is it? The table went quiet, that particular quiet where everybody senses something shifting, but nobody's sure yet which direction it's headed. Marcus's face tightened, a flash of something close to panic crossing it before he caught himself. Meredith, come on, don't do this right now. Not tonight. I asked him plainly in front of his whole family to just tell the truth about who'd actually handled the money and the appointments. My voice steady, even though every part of me wanted to shake. He denied it flat out. Right there at that table, said I was twisting things, that we'd done it together as a family, same defensive line he'd used on me privately for 3 years running, doubling down instead of backing off. I pulled out my phone. I played that recording right there at the table. Tyler's voice a little tinny through the speaker, then Marcus's clear as day, the $40,000 number. The basically dropped everything. All of it his own private boast, contradicting every single word he'd just denied, not 30 seconds earlier, in front of everyone who mattered most to him. The table went dead silent, forks frozen halfway to plates. His mother's face went through something complicated, watching her son's own recorded voice undo him in real time, the tissue still balled up uselessly in her fist. Gary, quiet the whole dinner the way he mostly was, these days just looked at me and said soft, barely above a whisper, Meredith, I always knew it was you, honey. I just never said anything. Marcus didn't have anywhere left to go with it. He sat there, red-faced, silent, while 3 years of a story finally collapsed under the weight of his own recorded voice. It's been 5 months since that dinner. Marcus and I are still married, still working through what all of this actually means for us some days. better than others. Honestly, some evenings still tense in ways that surprise us both. He's apologized more than once genuinely this time, not the defensive kind of sorry he used to offer when I brought it up privately over the years. Actual accountability finally sitting underneath the words, instead of excuses. We're in counseling now, twice a month with a therapist Angela recommended, trying to understand what made him need that story so badly in the first place, what it says about a man who couldn't sit with his own father's illness, but needed somehow to be seen as the hero of it anyway, needed the applause more than he needed the truth to hold up under any real scrutiny. Our therapist calls it something close to borrowed identity. A man building a version of himself out of somebody else's actual sacrifice, because his own felt too thin to stand on alone, and hearing that named out loud helped me understand him a little better, even if it didn't undo 3 years of quiet erasure. Gary and I have gotten closer since that dinner, actually. In a way I didn't expect going into any of this. He calls me most weeks now, just to chat, thanks me plain and direct in ways he never quite managed, while Marcus's version of events was still the official story everybody nodded along to at every family gathering. Last month, he told me almost shy about it, that he still does the exercises I taught him all those years ago. Every single morning before breakfast said it out loud like a confession he'd been holding on to, wanting me to know it stuck. Wanting me to know somebody in that family actually remembered who'd taught him. His mother hasn't said much to me directly about any of it, still processing her own part in cheering on a story that was never true. Still working out how to look at her son a little differently, now that she's seen what he's actually capable of when he thinks nobody's checking the facts behind the applause. I won't tell you this ends with everything magically fixed between us, because it doesn't, not completely, not yet anyway. And I promised myself I'd only ever tell the truth in this story, same as I finally told it at that dinner table. Some days, I still feel that old anger simmering, 3 years of my own sacrifice, quietly erased and rewritten into somebody else's highlight reel, 3 years of biting my tongue at tables full of people cheering for a lie. Most days, I'm just grateful I finally trusted myself enough to stop letting it slide one more time, one more dinner, one more toast. That wasn't mine to sit through silent one more version of history I didn't actually live through myself. If there's one thing I'd want you to take from this, it's simple. The truth doesn't need you to raise your voice to defend it. Sometimes it just needs you to hit record and wait for the right moment to let it speak for itself, plain and undeniable in a voice that isn't even yours. I'm Meredith Holt. I'm 31 years old, and I caught my husband in a lie he'd been telling for 3 years straight. One dinner and one wedding and one cookout at a time, each version a little more polished than the last. He denied it in front of his whole family, doubled down instead of just telling the truth when I gave him the chance to. Then I played the recording, and nobody at that table needed me to say another word after that, because sometimes the truth really does speak best in somebody else's own voice played back at exactly the moment they least expect to hear it.